Hello, everybody, and welcome to Our Mind on Music. This is Season 2, Episode 24, the legendary Brill Building. This is actually the 50th episode overall of Our Mind on Music. And it gets stronger in every way, and it gets deeper. When Leon and I first started doing Our Mind on Music a little over a year ago, I don't think we had a clear plan on where it was going. We just knew we loved music and wanted to talk about it. Very thankfully, a lot of people have chimed in to the conversation. We have so many people watching in now who are part of this music community. I'm really thankful to all of you for watching, for commenting, for subscribing, and I'm just excited to see how this continues to evolve over time. In this episode, I'm speaking with Phil Yale, who does a podcast exclusively on Spotify called Phil's Tracks. This is actually the third episode that Phil and I are doing a partner podcast. Phil will release an audio version of this conversation as well, so please do tune into that. The link to Phil's Tracks will be in the description, along with links for everything else that we talk about here. Okay, let's start off. Phil will ask me about my thoughts on what the Brill Building is.
Quote unquote, the Brill Building.
Okay, I love that you said quote unquote, because actually you pointed out in our communications together preparing for this episode, the Brill Building is, I'll say, 1619 Broadway Avenue in New York. And it was, in the 1960s, especially, the center of music for really North American music. You know, the songwriters, the publishers, all of the people making music at that time, there was a huge team of people writing songs out of this building. Now, what the part that I didn't know that you pointed out to me is that there were actually two Brill buildings in fact. There's 1619 Broadway Avenue, and then right in the same area is 1650 Broadway. So there were actually two buildings that were referred to as the Brill Building. And this is where songs that we know and love were written. I mean, when you look at the list of people who cut their teeth there, Paul Simon, Carole King, and Jerry Goffin, who we've talked about, that was sort of how this conversation started for us. Leiber and Stoller, who started writing together in the 50s. I mean, you mentioned Hound Dog. That's Leiber and Stoller. That's a Brill Building song, actually. That's what we're talking about. This is like when we talked about the Wrecking Crew in terms of a team of people who recorded almost all the songs that we love from that period. Well, for them to record those songs, you had to have somebody write them. And those people writing them were the people in the Brill buildings. It's amazing.
And not only were and we're going to go through some of the more iconic songwriters in this episode, but not only were the songwriters there, the record labels were there, the publishers were there, just about anybody associated with music in early 60s. Think about, now for me, I guess I started really getting into music when I was about 8 or 9, so 64, 65. Virtually everything I was listening to probably in some way came out of, quote unquote, the Brill Building. And there's nothing in contemporary music that even comes close to matching that as far as being at the center of the music universe. Is there?
Not exactly. I mean, I will say that there are a handful of people today who are writing tons of hits that some of whom we actually don't even know their names, you know, which is similar to the Brill Building effect. You know, they're not sitting in an office building with, you know, someone Carole King caliber next door, you know, but they're sitting on a MacBook writing many of the songs that we know and love. So not exactly, but there are still, you know, groups of people who are out there writing the songs that we love, or that we hear on the radio, at least, or on the internet, that we don't know their names. So maybe in the future, it'd be interesting to follow up on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think one thing that's going to come out of this, we're probably going to come up with about 6 more additional episodes that we can talk about. Because candidly, and you're the one that really did a lot of the work on the research of this, is I was getting ready for it. There's just so many different angles we could go or pursue in this episode. It's sort of like going into a record store to go buy a 45 and coming out with a 12 album box set, right? There's just so much volume of quality information that we can share, but we got a limited amount of time. So you're the one that came up with these groups. I'm just going to talk about the segments we're going to have, and then we'll get into the first one. You thought dynamic duos and couples. I mean, actually, there's so much. We've got 2 different groups that we're going to talk about in that one. Then the next one, teen idols, and then young upstarts with some very noteworthy names that got their earliest day starts out of the Brill Building. So let's get right into the first group, the dynamic duos and couples. And our first group that we're going to focus in under dynamic duos and couples, there's 3 different duos. Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich, Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. Jeremy, what do we need to know about these 3 duos? Let's start with Mann and Weil, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Mann and Weil. So there's just so much that I could say about it. So I'm going to really rein myself in so that this is not a 3-hour episode. But so you have mentioned a couple of times when you and I spoke about You've Lost That Lovin Feelin, which the Righteous Brothers recorded first. And I didn't realize how many other people recorded it, but what was it, the best selling or the most listened to song of the last century?
I think it's most played radio song on the radio.
Okay. And that was written by this couple, Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil. The Righteous Brothers, it's an absolute classic. I mean, we talked about Hal Blaine before as a drummer. If he had only written the drum intro to Be My Baby, his career would have been a success. Well, this is that in spades. It's just incredible, the success of this song. And it's one in a huge list of songs that they wrote together.
You never close your eyes anymore when I kiss your lips. And there's no tenderness like before in your fingertips. You're trying hard not to show it, but baby, I know it. You lost that love and feeling. Oh, that love and feeling. You lost that love and feeling. Now it's gone.
I did just come across this. It was Weil doing the lyrics.
Okay.
Weil, she wrote the lyrics and Mann wrote the music.
Okay. And I've seen different references to this, so I'm not 100% sure how this goes, but I'll talk about this a bit later. Phil Spector, he has some songwriting credit in some places on this song, and I'm not sure how that works, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So I'll just mention that now and just sort of pin it up there for later.
And what's interesting to me is the type of songs that they had. I mean, You've Lost That Lovin Feelin, and then you compare it to, Kicks by Paul Revere and the Raiders. I mean, that was an anti-drug song, I think, wasn't it?
I believe you're right. Yeah.
And then the whole thing that was the iconic song for the Vietnam War, Got to Get Out of This Place.
We gotta get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do, we gotta get out of this place. Girl, there's a better life for me and you.
For me, that's one of the things that amazes me, and we'll see this a lot. Like, the variety of songs that these people wrote, because they would go in literally to an office and sit down for a day at the office writing the hits that you and I grew up hearing, like, and just the span of that. So these are people who sat down and said, okay, today we're going to write this kind of song, and we'll probably shop it to these people. And they sometimes had in mind who they wanted to sing or play that song. Like, it was methodical, which is incredible because there's such heartfelt songs. It's hard to imagine that somebody sat down with almost a formula to write them.
Well, and I went and saw with Holly, we went and saw the musical Beautiful on Carole King. Factually, they stretched it a little bit. But the impression I got was that there were songwriters that were just doing things on spec. They were just throwing things out there and hope somebody would pick it up. Then there were songwriters who wrote for specific groups. And then there was a situation where a record label executive like Kirchner would come in and say, hey, I need another song for the Shirelles, and it needs to be this theme. Like, there was even some direction to the topic that they wanted to have. So it was just this buffet of different options, as far as the songwriters coming up with their title, their lyrics, and their music. Weil and Mann wrote the ultimate song for the Brill Building on Broadway.
On Broadway. Yeah, right. We talked about that. Yeah.
They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway. They say there's always magic in the air.
I can just imagine them sitting in the office going, what are we going to write today? And they look out the window. It's Broadway. Let's write that. I would love to find out that that's actually what happened. The rents were cheaper at 1650 Broadway, and the newer and younger music publishers had offices there. When you went into Alden Music, on the right side, there were about 4 different little cubicles, and all they had was one upright piano, a piano bench, and 1 chair. That was it. And a big ashtray. Weil said, we wrote on Broadway about a girl wanting to escape a small town.
They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway.
Then we heard the Drifters were cutting. We brought it down to Leiber and Stoller in the Brill Building, who said that we could either go home and rewrite it for a male group, or we could write it with them. We idolized those guys, so we said, let's do it with you.
Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich.
So I chose to go with Be My Baby. Because once again, it's a Phil Spector connection that I want to talk about in a moment. But also, this is connected to the first episode that you and I did, which is The Wrecking Crew, when we talked about Hal Blaine, tens of thousands of recordings that he was on. And he was the one who did that Be My Baby intro. Dun, 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 wow. And I thought this was so cool. I didn't know this when you and I talked about The Wrecking Crew and Hal Blaine before, but there was a note that I read, him saying, maybe I'll just read it. That famous drum intro was an accident. I was supposed to play the snare on the second beat as well as the fourth, which would have been dum, da, dum, dum, da, which is a very sort of, let's just say, classic drum sound. He dropped a stick. He said, being the faker I was in those days, I left the mistake in and it became boom, ba, boom, boom. He dropped a stick. I tell my students this all the time. Like, mistakes happen. What you have to decide is it better than what you intended to do? You know? So sometimes mistakes are better than what you planned. And this is a huge case of that, you know.
It's interesting. I did some in my research. There's a couple of things that were interesting. One were the classic one, Do Ron Ron by the Crystals. Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals. According to Wikipedia, they give them credit for the song Hanky Panky. Hanky Panky was Tommy James' first hit. And
Okay.
I read his book, Me, the Mob, and the Music. It's an incredible, and it's got a Brill Building connection because the record label that was owned by the mob that signed him was Roulette Records that operated out of one of the two Brill buildings. But he said that song, nobody knew who wrote it. It just was, it was just a song that was going around in the early 60s. There weren't even any real lyrics to it. People just kind of made up their own lyrics to it, including himself. And that's how it became the Hanky Panky. So I was surprised to see that that this duo was credited with that song.
Aufnahme aus Amerika, dort noch vor einigen Wochen Nummer 1 in Billboard und Cashbox, und zwar Tommy James and the Shirelles mit Hanky Panky.
My baby does the hanky panky. My baby does the hanky panky. Hey, my baby does the hanky panky. My baby does the hanky panky. Hey, my baby does the hanky panky.
So I should mention, like, Ellie Greenwich is credited for River Deep Mountain High. Incredible. And then they wrote You Like It.
There she was, just a walking down the street singing.
But we're going to find a lot of examples of what you just said, where we see a reference to something, somebody wrote this song. But then from the mouths of the people who recorded it, there are differing stories.
And we haven't even got to Leiber and Stoller.
These guys, I mean, Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. My favorite Christmas song of all time is Santa Claus is Back in Town, which I know sung by Elvis. It is the coolest Christmas song ever, by far. The piano parts in that song are just incredible.
Well, it's Christmas time, pretty baby, and the snow is falling on the ground. Well, it's Christmas time, pretty baby.
Hound Dog.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, girl. You're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying.
Growing up, my mom was a huge Elvis fan. We had Elvis playing in the house a lot. And so when I found out who wrote that song, and then there's the Coasters and the Drifters, and like, these guys are the quintessential Brill Building style. If the name Hitsville, USA wasn't already taken, I would have put it on them. Because for me, they were the beginning of understanding that, you know, the craft of writing a song for me.
Crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never gonna rap it, and you ain't no friend of mine.
Well, they wrote also Jailhouse Rock for Elvis. They wrote a lot of tracks for Elvis.
They did, yeah.
Hound Dog was not originally released by Elvis.
That's right, yep.
Big Mama Thornton.
Yeah, I feel real good. I just want to let everybody know all about it. You ain't nothing but a hound when Snoopy around the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog when Snoopy around the door. You can wag your tail.
Now, I don't know anything about Big Mama Thornton, but when I did my episode on Elvis's debut album, her name came up, and I listened to her music from the 50s.
Big Mama Thornton was, I mean, she was blues before they had the words rock and roll, the Alan Freed coin thing. Big Mama Thornton, with the way that she sang, was so powerful and boisterous, and you know, it's just so strong. I would have thought that was, I mean, that was definitely where one of the places that Janis Joplin got her influence. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is the one that played the guitar in a way that I don't think was really replicated until Hendrix almost.
You're absolutely right. And she was in the 30s. She was a generation ahead as far as from a guitar style goes.
Stand By Me, also written by Leiber and Stoller and performed by Ben E. King. I believe Ben E. King gets writing credit, co-writing credit on this song as well.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see.
We're getting into our second segment now on dynamic duos and couples part 2. The first one that you identified as the songwriting team of Gerry Goffin and Carole King. The second one's Doc Pomus and Mort Shuman. And the third, Burt Bacharach and Hal David. You and I did an episode on Goffin and King, so I'm going to put that link to that one in the show notes. Goffin and King, what do you think people need to know?
A young married couple. They wrote a song called The Loco-Motion. Little Eva sang that song, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, which was released by the Shirelles, later by Carole King.
Tonight you're mine completely. You give your love so sweetly tonight.
What about Doc Pomus and Mort Shuman?
So Doc Pomus and Mort Shuman, I have to say, before you put their names on this list, I didn't know, I didn't realize how much I knew about them because they're songs, right?
To be a successful songwriter, you have to write songs. It's not like you want to write songs or you figured out the best way to make a living, you know? There is some kind of terrible force, and sometimes it's out of control. You have to keep writing and writing, even when there's no meaning to it, where you know you're not going to make any money out of it, you know it's going to take up all your time, and you know nobody's going to give a damn anyway. But, you know, someday you're in the street and somebody is singing the song that you've written. You know, you want to go over to that person and say, hey, you know, I wrote that song, but they think you're some kind of nut, so you never do it.
Save the Last Dance for Me, 1960, by Doc Pomus and Mort Shuman.
You can dance every dance with the guy.
First recorded by the Drifters with Benny King on lead vocals. It peaked at #1, and I can't tell you how many cover versions of this. But I really love the Michael Bublé version. Burt Bacharach and Hal David, you almost have to call this a dynamic trio because the amount of songs that they wrote for that amazing voice, legend singer, Dionne Warwick, Walk On By, and a bunch of other songs. One of the songs that they wrote and tried to convince Dionne Warwick to sing, she turned it down. It's called What the World Needs Now Is Love.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love.
Yeah, you know,
sweet
and I'm
love.
scanning a list here of the top 10 songs by this songwriting duo. According to this list, someone I really like, that's B.J. Thomas. That was Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. Herb Albert, This Guy's in Love with You, an iconic song from back in the 60s. The Carpenters, maybe one of the best vocalists of our generation. It's debatable, but she's clearly up there. And the Fifth Dimension duo just really cranked out the hits in the 60s. Can we go back to Doc Pomus and Mort Shuman? Just a scan. Yep. You mentioned a few of them. These are ones that I remember from my early days. A Teenager in Love, This Magic Moment. You know, Jeremy, we talked about this very early on in our conversation, that there were actually two buildings associated with the Brill Building, 1619 and 1650. Each of them had their own personality, though. One was kind of like old school and one was kind of like new school.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about 1619. When people talk about the Brill Building, they're talking about 1619 Broadway. And so I was trying to look at, is there a specific divide between the two? There was an article that I found on the internet, actually two articles. You know, the Brill Building, we know for all of the people that we're talking about, Carole King and Leiber and Stoller and all that. But before that, there was what you might call the old guard. There were songwriters from the Tin Pan Alley days and from the big band era that were writing songs before all these young upstarts came along, very much like we talked about with the Wrecking Crew, which are rumored to be called the Wrecking Crew because the old guard of the session players were saying, these kids coming in here with blue jeans and t-shirts, they're going to wreck the business. So somebody said, well, then we're the Wrecking Crew.
We are going to put the link in the show notes. The title of the article that you were kind enough to share with me is called 1650 versus 1619 Broadway, Opposing Homes of the Hits.
Yeah. So this is Kim Sloan's wrote this. This is actually, I found it on WordPress. I don't know if it's available other places. And also the Encyclopedia Britannica had some great quotes on this.
And we've now reached the third segment. This is called Teen Idols, and names like Paul Anka, Neil Sedaka, Gene Pitney, Bobby Darin. Jeremy, what can you tell us about this group of individuals?
Okay, so I mean, the thing about the Brill Building in the 60s with all of these songwriters that we are talking about, they were pretty specifically looking for a teen market. So when you talk about Paul Anka, the Lonely Boy, Neil Sedaka, Gene Pitney, Bobby Darin, these are guys who would stand up in front of a microphone and girls would swoon at the sound of their voice. And that was part of the market. A big part of the market for the 1960s Brill Building was this teen sensation. Paul Anka, I'm proud to say, a Canadian. He is on tour right now. Did you know that?
Actually, I do, only because I had a couple of Facebook friends go to the concert, and they were so impressed by it, they showed me a video clip.
We also had a teen idol, Neil Sedaka. Neil Sedaka wrote with a partner, Howard Greenfield, Breaking Up Is Hard to Do in 1962.
Most requested song, if you don't mind one more.
I love it.
All right, this is the most requested song that we have of all the hits that you have ever done.
Yeah.
And we do quite a bit of this. Of course, every weekend we have what we call $1 Million Weekend. Every other song is an oldie goldie flashback.
Yeah,
right, and this is like almost every night, weekly for sure, on the top 10. And it's called Breaking Up Is Hard to Do. Would you mind?
I love it.
All right, Neil Sedaka, Breaking Up Is Hard to Do.
Do down, doobie doo down down, comma down, doobie doo down down, comma down, doobie doo down down. Breaking up is hard to do. Don't take your love away from me. Don't you leave my heart in misery. If you go,
then if you look at Wikipedia, the Wikipedia article on this says Breaking Up Is Hard to Do as one of the quintessential examples of the Brill Building sound crafted by Neil Sedaka, quote unquote, and his contemporaries.
The next teen idol is Gene Pitney and then Bobby Darin.
Gene Pitney, It Hurts to Be in Love, was written by Howard Greenfield, who we just talked about, but this time with Helen Miller, was a top 10 hit in 1964. I found this quote. It said, "This It Hurts to Be in Love is one of a long line of successful Brill Building Sound hits created by composers and arrangers in New York City." And then Burt Bacharach and Hal David also wrote "The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance," which was sung by Gene Pitney, a songwriter in his own right. And then also Bobby Darin did a Doc Pomus and Mort Shuman song called "Plain Jane."
Let's bring this fellow back again. Bobby Darin, Plain Jane.
My plain Jane never wears, I know, lipstick or paint. You know she'll never try to be what she ain't. From early in the morning.
He's obviously most well known because of Mac the Knife. I mean, how can you turn down Mac the Knife? Well, we've talked about or dropped the name Phil Spector a couple of times. What do we need to know about Phil Spector as it relates to the Brill Building?
For me, I wrote him in as a category that says songwriters, question mark.
Right.
Because he's credited on quite a few songs that came out of the Brill Building teamwork, let's say. But I have to wonder, was it that he actually helped to write those songs, or was he such a mega producer that he said, listen, I'd love to produce River Deep Mountain High, but I'm going to need to get writing credit on that. Now, I don't know. I'm definitely not stating that, and I'm curious if that's what happened.
And that River Deep Mountain High, that's one that was also with Jeff Berry and Ellie Greenwich. Is that correct?
Yeah, Jeff Berry, Ellie Greenwich, yeah. And I mean, they wrote a number of songs that were produced by Phil Spector, and he got writing credit on it. So that was part of the thing that made me think that. I will also say somebody that we're about to talk about is Sonny Bono, who started out as the assistant to Phil Spector and his gopher, go for my coffee. So Phil Spector, once again, finds himself in a category of one because he's so unique. And Doc Pomus talks about that in the documentary as well. He says, the minute you met Phil Spector, you knew this was a very driven, very ambitious person. And for him, Doc Pomus, he was like, and therefore, this is the person I want to work with.
Before we get off of the song River Deep Mountain High, I just want to mention it's listed by Rolling Stone as number 37 on their list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. That was the version that was recorded by Ike and Tina Turner. The song is also listed as one of the 500 songs that helped shape rock and roll. Another notable artist, songwriter out of the Brill Building is someone, I think people don't know her name, but they know her songs, and that's Laura Nyro.
I love doing episodes like this because I learned so much. Laura Nyro was not a name that I knew. I was doing research, looking up who were the songwriters of the Brill Building, and this name came up, and I was like, Laura Nyro, I've never heard that name, I'm sure. And then I looked at the songs that she had written: Eli's Coming by Three Dog Night, Don't He End by Barbra Streisand, Wedding Bell Blues, The Fifth Dimension. And then the one that really hit me, because I love this song, and When I Die by Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
I'm not scared of dying, and I don't really care if it's peace you find in dying. Well, then let the time be near. If it's peace you find in dying, and if dying time is near, just bundle up my coffin, 'cause it's cold way down there. I hear that it's cold way down there, yeah, crazy cold way down there. And when I die, and when I'm gone, there'll be one child born in this world. Carry on, carry on.
To find out that this song was written by someone whose name I had not, I think, ever heard, blew me away. So a lot of people won't have heard this name, Laura Nyro, but it's well worth mentioning, well worth looking into. And even songs that when you see the title, you say, I don't think I've heard that one. Listen to it, because it's worth listening to.
We talked about a little bit about the Fifth Dimension in the Wrecking Crew episode, because the Wrecking Crew were the studio musicians that did Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In, and that whole transition between Aquarius to Let the Sunshine In. That's such an iconic part of that song. Laura Nyro, it's interesting. She's made many appearances on Phil Spector's episodes. I just didn't realize it until I looked at the names. And When I Die, that was Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I did an episode on Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Eli's Coming, Three Dog Night. I've done an episode on Three Dog Night. We've already talked about the Wrecking Crew, and I also did one on the Newport Jazz Festival. All right. We are now in the section called Young Upstarts. We got, there's 4 names that you threw out here. Some guy by the name of Neil Diamond. I think I might be able to talk a little bit about Neil. Sonny Bono, we talked a little bit about him already. Tony Orlando, Paul Simon, as Jerry Landis. But Neil Diamond, this is the dude that I really started to buy multiple albums from. This would have been the later 60s, mid to later 60s and into the early 70s. Anytime he came out with an album, I was all over it. He got his start as a songwriter. Interesting, in his biography, but he was actually a gang member in New York City. Isn't that shocking? Neil Diamond was in a gang in New York City. And he used music to kind of change his life. So he was writing songs for like $25 a piece or something like that. And some guy by the name of Don Kirshner, who changed music in a lot of ways, found the song I'm a Believer. That was the song by the Monkees. It peaked at number 1 in 66. It stayed on the charts for like 7 weeks or so. It was the song for them called A Little Bit Me and A Little Bit You.
Walk out, Bill, don't you walk out. We got things to say. Talk out, let's have it talked out.
And then there's this guy called Sonny Bono from Sonny and Cher. And you talked a little bit about he was the gopher for Phil Spector. But he also did some songwriting. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess the long and short of it is, I mean, he was known as being the songwriter for I Got You, Babe, and The Beat Goes On, but I didn't realize he wrote Needles and Pins. We mentioned Jackie DeShannon earlier. She released Needles and Pins, which Sonny Bono wrote with Jack Nietzsche, who was known as a song arranger as well as songwriter.
I saw him today, I saw his face. It was a face I loved, and I knew I had to run away and get down on my knees and pray that they go away, but still they begin.
Needles and Pins by Sonny Bono and Jack Nietzsche, a Brill Building classic. 1978, covered by the Ramones. There's an album out there, I think 2 volumes of it, called The Brill Building Covered. Tony Orlando. I find it hard to say just Tony Orlando and not say and Don.
Right. Yep.
So long before he was tying a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree, he was in a band called the Five Gents. And he and his 4 buddies were recording songs for the Five Gents, recording demos. And you mentioned Don Kirshner, who heard these demos and said, man, this is really good stuff. Would you consider working at the Brill Building to write songs for us? You know, and a number of people, Ellie Greenwich is one of them that talks about, you know, Kirshner was just trying to bring in as many people as possible, because what he would do is he'd say, okay, Bobby Darin needs a song. You know, we need to record something. Which one of you is going to create the next hit? And he would pit them against each other. So it became like this competitive ground, which I thought, when I heard that, I thought, ugh, that'd be terrible. It was like a snake pit. She said it was awesome because they were all on the top of their game all the time. Tony Orlando walked into that. And he wrote a song for a band called Featherbed to Barry Manilow.
Wow.
So actually Tony Orlando wrote Could It Be Magic with Barry Manilow. Featherbed, it was a bunch of studio musicians with him on lead vocals. So the studio musicians were a vehicle for him to sing these songs. What's interesting, you and I talked about this a little bit earlier, is when you hear about a song that there's a songwriting credit, and then you read another source that tells you something very different.
I wrote this next tune with a friend of mine. Her name is Adrian Anderson, and we both wrote it in collaboration with a man named Frédéric Chopin. What I mean by that is that I took the melody from a Chopin prelude. It's the Chopin prelude in C minor, if anybody cares.
Cyclone in my mind. Sweet Melissa, angel of my lifetime, answer to all answers.
What I thought was interesting was not that he was pointing out to everybody that he had lifted it from a classical piece of music, but the fact that he didn't mention Tony Orlando at all.
I wonder how much of that, and I don't know, I'm just speculating, but how much of that is maybe they had a beef at some point, so he's just, showing some disrespect for him, but not including Tony Orlando. I don't.
Maybe. I was thinking maybe it was a marketing thing. Like, Tony Orlando would have been perfectly fine with it, because he would have said, like, Tony Orlando and Dawn had their sound, Barry Manilow had a different style, and they wouldn't want to bring those two things at that time, because they were both huge at the time, right? Maybe they saw it as a marketing foible if they put them together. So they just kept that name out of it. And it was like a decade before that they had written it together as well.
Our last of the young upstarts is somebody that we all know as Jerry Landis.
You're gone and I must confess. My nights are spent in misery. Only my sorrow lingers me.
The world famous Jerry Landis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, with his friend Tom, right?
Yes.
So Jerry Landis was a songwriter. He wrote the song that I found that I actually really love is Loneliness. And they had another song, I think it was called Teen Beat. He wrote with a friend of his whose name was Tom. So they called themselves Tom and Jerry. So Jerry Landis and Tom Graff were Tom and Jerry. Later on, they decided that they would take away those names. Tom Graff, I got to tell you, the reason he was called that is because he loved mathematics. I'm not even joking. He loved mathematics, and he gave himself the last name Graff because he loved math. So Tom Graff. Later changed it to Art Gar, and then said, you know what? I'm just going to put the whole name in there. It's Art Garfunkel, and Jerry Landis, of course, Paul Simon.
I do declare there were times when I was so lonesome I took some comfort there. La 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 la.
I found, I'm looking on Spotify as we talk here, I'm seeing a song called I'm Lonely by Jerry Landis. I found a song, one from 60 and one from 61. One from 61 is called Play Me a Sad Song. You definitely know that it's Paul Simon.
Saturday night and I'm all alone. Don't have a date, I'm just sitting home. The radio's playing the top tunes.
Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting. It was a very young Paul Simon sound. So Loneliness is from 1959, right? It was clearly a very young Paul Simon, but you can hear the voice in there. So I thought that was neat. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our Mind on Music episode 50, season 2, episode 24, featuring my friend Phil Yale of Phil's Tracks. I really hope you enjoyed the information and the conversation we shared in this episode. I do hope you'll continue to look in for our video podcast episodes on YouTube. As well, please do take a look at Spotify if you're on Spotify for Phil's Tracks.
Phil's Tracks is distributed on Spotify because I like including the music. Free Spotify subscribers, hey, you get a 30-second clip of each track. If you have a premium subscription, you get to hear the entire song. But to make it easy for everyone to listen to all of the tracks in their entirety, I put together a companion playlist. Just go to the show notes and click on that link, Phil's Tracks Companion Playlist.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I do hope we'll see you here on Our Mind on Music moving forward. Don't forget to like if you liked it, subscribe if you'd like more, and please do comment in the comments section. Your comments help a lot in preparing future episodes. Thank you very much. Have a great week.